All right. Hey, good morning. If you are new or newer or visiting with us, we're in week 3 of a 3-week mini-series that we're calling Fault Lines. And what we've been doing is that each week we've been looking at a really powerful force that is at work in you and in our culture that actually collides smack dab into Jesus' vision for your life. And they're like two tectonic plates, and the way tectonic plates work is that one dominates the other, and one gets pushed up and one gets pushed down. And these three things that we've been looking at, these three forces, are actually probably a fault line of faith where you have the opportunity to see your spiritual life take on new dimensions and new heights, or it will be the area where Jesus will be diminished and shrink in your life. And that first force we looked at was individualism. That's the big word, me. And that runs smack into Jesus' words, which says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and my sake will find it. And so Jesus tells us that if you live a self-centered life, if you make your life all about you, in the end you will lose you. And so I shared with you how Jesus calls us out of the radical individualism of our culture that's marked by pride. And he calls us into community with one another, a community that's marked by vulnerability and humility. The second fault line we looked at is this word consumerism, or we might say more. And this is that force in our culture that gets us to see everything as a commodity meant to serve us. So not just the stuff we spend our money on, but people can become a commodity. Church can become a commodity whose end function is to serve us. To which Jesus says, if you want a life of greatness, if you want to be great in my kingdom, you will first be a servant rather than the one who is served. And so Jesus calls us out of our consumerism by committing to serving each other, and we call that the church. And that leads us to our third and final fault line, which is the word materialism, or the word we'll use, mine. Now, materialism is that voice that's inside of our heads that tells us that my present and my future security, my present and my future happiness is directly tied to how much I have, how much I spend, how much I can store up and squirrel away for myself. And if once I have enough, once I get enough, then I will finally be rich. Then I will finally feel rich. Then I will finally be happy and be able to enjoy all the things that money has provided me. See, that's the claim that money tries to make on our life. And in one sense, it has the appearance of wisdom. Because it's good to look after yourself. It's good to be able to enjoy the fruit of your hard work. It's even smart to save up for a rainy day. Those are all wise. But here's the deal. If the focus of your money is on you, the word mine, then you will never feel secure, you will never feel happy, you will never feel rich, regardless of how much your net worth is. That's a promise that Jesus is actually going to unpack for us. Jesus is actually going to show us that security and happiness and that sense of being rich we think that comes from having lots of money is actually not tied to how much money you have at all. It's tied directly to what you do with the money you have. And that brings us to Luke chapter 12. I don't have slides today, so you're going to want to open a Bible in front of you. It was that kind of week. I wasn't able to get that done. Been running behind all week. Hence, I was here at 5 o'clock this morning. So I shouldn't tell you that because you're like, oh, we could tell. It was a 5 o'clock in the morning finishing up his sermon type of day. Luke chapter 12. The context of the story that we're going to look at is that there is a guy who's having a fight with his family members over their dad's inheritance, over their dad's will. And so he wants Jesus to get in the middle of this to try to solve this dispute. Now, if you want to see how powerful greed is, or how ugly that word mine can be, just look at what happens to a family when there isn't a will, or the will's not clearly articulated, or one family member feels like they're getting shortchanged. You want to see the ugliness of that word mine, or what greed can do to people? Just look at what happens then. Well, that's what this guy's trying to bring Jesus into, and Jesus wants no part of it. I don't blame him. But he does sense that this is a teachable moment. A teachable moment not just for this guy, but for his disciples and for us. And so Jesus begins to address it. And we'll pick up in verse 15 of Luke chapter 12. And Jesus told his disciples and all those who were listening, the crowd that was around them, "Watch out and be on guard against all greed, because one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions." Now, we use this word materialism in this series, and it's kind of a sanitized word for the word that Jesus would use, which is the word greed. Materialism is just a sanitized way to talk about greed. And greed, maybe more than any other sin, it has the ability to camouflage itself in our hearts, because greed is really hard for me to spot in me. Greed is something we can spot in other people, but it's hard to spot in ourselves, because here's the deal. It doesn't matter how much we have, or how much or how little we give. There's always somebody who has more and gives less. And so we can look at them and say, well, that is greedy, but I've got less and I give more, so I am not greedy. We can play this comparison game because greed is something that's really easy to see in others, but because of that, it's difficult to spot within ourselves. But here's the deal. Greed isn't tied to an amount. But greed is actually comes from this belief that whatever I have is for me. It's mine. That is the song of greed. And Jesus says, be on guard against greed. And he gives us a clue to how to spot greed in our lives. Because it's hard for us to see in ourselves, he gives us some warnings, some indicators. And he says that greed is birthed in this idea that the richness of my life is determined by how much I accumulate, how much I have. Therefore, to be really alive, I need to get what is mine, guard what is mine, grow what is mine, so I can enjoy what is mine and my life. And Jesus says that is greed talking, and it's a lie. And so Jesus tells this parable. Verse 16. Then Jesus told him a parable. A rich man's land was very productive, and he thought to himself, what should I do, since I don't have anywhere to store my crops? This is what I'll do, he said. I will tear down my barns and build bigger barns, and store all my grain and all my goods there. Then I will say to myself, you have many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. Okay, this guy's like life is going well. His business is going well. He's had the most productive year that he's ever had, way more than he forecasted, right? He shattered his year-end profit expectation. If you went into his office and you saw the chart on the wall that had his profit forecast, the red lines like off the paper up on the drywall. That's how good a year this guy has had. And so his response to all this unexpected wealth, all this newfound abundance, is to expand. I'll build a bigger barn, get a bigger garage, rent a storage unit to store all the stuff that I have, all this wealth that is rolling in. Then I can put my feet up and I can enjoy what I have amassed for myself. Now, I totally get this thinking. In fact, if I was here in the crowd listening to this is where I'm kind of laughing nervously. Because I just know that Jesus is going to set up this guy to spank him. That's what he always does in these stories. But it's like, I kind of like this guy. I kind of think like this guy. The guy sounds like a visionary. He sounds like an entrepreneur. He sounds like a guy that gets stuff done. He sounds like the guy that the Chamber of Commerce gives a reward to. He sounds like the guy that at the coffee shop people are like, man, you see how well Bill's done this year? You see his new barn? State-of-the-art barn, right? He looks like that type of guy, a guy that we want to emulate, a guy that we esteem because he sounds rich. He's made it. And now he's in a place that he can experience all the good things that his hard work has won him. Now, if we were to take pause here before we let Jesus slap this guy and slap us, if we were to take pause here, and if I were to ask you hypothetically, I won't make you put up your hand because I don't trust that you'll be honest and actually put up your hand. But here's the deal. If I was to ask you hypothetically, how many of you wish that you could be entrusted by God to have large amounts of cash? How many of you would love, there we go. How many of you would love to be entrusted with God with so much money that you don't know where to do? You don't even know where to put it. You're like Walter White on Breaking Bad. You're like burying it under the house and you're putting it in the crawl space. You got so much cash just like him. Except for you're not cooking meth. Just forget all that whole part. You've just been like given by really honorable means. You've got all this cash. How many of you would like to have that much cash? And then if I was to ask you, well, why? Why would you want to have that much money? And if we could get past all the answers you're supposed to say and all, the beauty pageant answers, I would like to have so much cash so that I could help all children everywhere fulfill all of their dreams. Right? If we could get past that and you could tell me why you really would like that, I think most of us would say it's because then I would feel secure. Then my stress would go down. Then it would give me the freedom to do what I really want. Then I could be generous to the people I would like to help. You see, we think that all of those things follow riches. That riches is like the train, and behind it is freedom, and behind it is happiness, and behind it is generosity. So all those goodies follow the train of riches. So if we could just get riches, then we'd have all that stuff too. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works in real life, and that's certainly not how it works in Jesus' economy. Let's just take generosity, for example. We think that generosity is something that will click into us once we get to a certain amount of income. Like if I just get the raise, or once we get the house paid off, or if the tech bonus is bigger than we expected, then we will be able to be generous. It doesn't work that way. That is the lie of greed. I read a stat this week that said that Christians give a lower percentage of their money today than they did during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, Christians gave away a higher percentage of their income than we do now, in a time of scarcity. And in a time when we live in relative abundance, like overshadowing abundance compared to then, we give away less. Now, why is it? It's because there is a trap. There is a trap that is laid in this idea of more. There is this trap that is laid in this idea of accumulation. Because here's the deal. Accumulation, the more that we think is going to deliver on the freedom, the happiness, the riches, the generosity, it never pulls into station. And so we think, well, we just got to go a little bit further. We just got to drive that train a little bit further, and then we'll get there. J.D. Rockefeller. I need to slow down a little bit. J.D. Rockefeller, the first ever billionaire in the history of the world, right? American, had more money than he could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. He could buy anything that he wanted. Any kind of human situation he could buy his way out of. He was asked by a reporter, how much money is enough? And you know what he famously said?
Just a little bit more.
Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. You see, Jesus is going to uncover that thinking in this story because he brilliantly exposes the two places we automatically go to with money. We go one of two places, and they're both alluded to here in the story. The first place we go is that we think that all of our stuff is for our consumption. I worked for it, I earned it, I'm going to spend it how I like to fulfill my desires. And here's the deal. Your desires are an appetite. I had an appetite last night, and so I went to the fridge, and I satisfied my appetite. And then I got up this morning, and guess what? I had an appetite again. And I had to go back to the fridge. I had to satisfy. Appetites never end. Appetites continually come. So the word when we put our money towards desire is always just a little bit more, because you will always have a little bit more of an appetite. The second way that we tend to spend money is like this guy. Is we hoard it and we squirrel it away. Because once we have enough, then we'll feel safe, then we'll feel secure. And the motive that drives that thinking with our money is fear. The problem with that is that we are really, really good at generating those what-if questions. Okay, I've got this much now, but what if this happens? So I need a little bit more. And we get a little bit more, and then guess what? We can conjure up all kinds of other worst-case scenarios that drive us to hoard and save up and squirrel away just a little bit more. This is the problem with a little bit more, is that our barns can always get bigger. Your barn can always get bigger. So the more that we have, the more we just think up new ways to focus our spending on us. There is no amount of riches that triggers this generosity gene in us. It doesn't happen. It's a fairy tale. We think, well, when that happens, when I get some more money, then I can be generous. Then I'll be happy. Then I'll be free. It never happens. Because the word mine will always expand the barn first if given the chance. So Jesus, in verse 20, says this. But God says to this guy, who thinks very much like I reflexively think, He says, "You fool, this very night your life is demanded of you." See, Jesus calls this guy a fool not because he's rich, but because he thinks all of his riches terminate on himself. There is not even a hint of thought of sharing. No thought of using this unplanned windfall to help others. I mean, even like at the crassest level, I mean, this guy has just filled up his grain silo to the maximum capacity. He surpassed what he thought his best year would produce, and he's got more left over, and he could give some of that away and still have a banner year. But he doesn't even go there. 8 times Jesus uses the word me, I, or mine to show that this guy is so obsessed with his stuff. Because that's how that little bit more works. And this guy thinks, well, I've worked hard, I've accumulated all this, now it's time for me to kick back, take it easy, and enjoy all that I've amassed for myself. And Jesus calls this guy a fool because guess what? This guy has run out of time before he's run out of stuff. And the same thing will happen to you, and the same thing will happen to me. We will run out of time before we run out of stuff. That's why Jesus is saying, don't think that your life is measured by how much stuff you have. It's not. Because there'll be stuff left over when you have no life left. Because your life is marked by time. And that's why this guy is a fool. And then just to kind of like push on the foolishness, Jesus follows it up with this. And those things that you have prepared, whose will they be now? All that you have saved up, all that you have squirreled away, all that you've rented storage space so you can enjoy down the road, who's it going to be now? And the obvious answer is somebody else's. Not because he's generous, but because he's dead. And the cliche statement is true that there's no U-Haul behind a hearse. We don't get to take anything with us. And so all those plans that this guy had made, all the stuff that he had amassed that he thinks is going to secure his future, he thinks is going to finally help him feel happy and maybe finally help him feel freedom, all of that will be given to somebody else. And here's the tragedy that this guy, why Jesus calls him a fool, is that here's the deal. That the value of your life and my life is never measured by what we leave behind. The value of your life and mine is measured by what we give. I have yet to be at the funeral, and I've been at lots of funerals. I have yet to be at the funeral where people get up and they praise the guy for how much he accumulated. And they, what's the word I'm thinking of? I just lost it. They heaped, that's the word I was looking at. They heaped praise on the woman for all that she squirreled away. We went into his closet and there was all these government bonds that, came to term 30 years ago. He must have had a windfall. We found money stuffed in her mattress that she squirreled away, and everybody's like, oh, that's so amazing. They're dabbing their eyes. Nobody does that because we do not praise people for what they accumulate. Nobody celebrates how much we amass at a funeral. We celebrate generosity, don't we? We celebrate selflessness. Look, here's the deal. Matt and I were talking about this week that we hoard and we consume on ourselves because we want to feel rich. But the truth is, when we do those two things, when we hoard and when we consume on ourselves, we demonstrate just how poor we actually are. Hoarding exposes our poverty. It exposes our insecurity. It shows how much of a slave to money we actually are. When I see a need and I do not meet it, I am never poorer than I am at that moment. And I never feel my poverty more at that moment. Because no amount of money in the bank will change that feeling of poverty if we just keep it to ourselves. And Jesus says everything that you work for, everything that you accumulate is going to be left to somebody else. It's only a matter of time. And that's the foolishness of this whole deal. Instead of giving it to somebody else after you're gone and you don't reap any of the happiness from that, why not be generous now? Why not experience what it feels like to be rich when we give to another in need? Because we never feel more rich than when we are generous. It doesn't matter how much money you have. We have that feeling of wealth when we give. When you give yourself, when you help, when you use your strength or your power or your possessions to help another, that's when you feel most vibrant, most alive. In his book, The Art of Loving, social philosopher Erich Fromm said this, quote, "We feel most vibrant. We feel the greatest potency of our strength, our power, our wealth when we give it to another." And that's true, isn't it? When we were in Africa as a family in 2013, that trip was just like chock full of like seared in my mind memories. And 99% of them are awesome and good. And one of the ones that I will treasure more than anything else came in a very unexpected day and a very unexpected way. We were going to a place called the Nakumart, which is like Walmart in Kenya, Nakumart. And we were going there to buy groceries for a few days. And as we're heading in, there's a line of like fencing where they've got guards with machine guns and shotguns, which is a little bit unnerving when you go in the grocery store. And they're keeping all of the riffraff and the poor out there. So that as you're going to go buy your stuff at Nakumart, you're not, hindered by the inconvenience of somebody asking you, who's starving, asking you for something to eat. So we're going in and I look over and I see this lady who is like, she just looks like just skin and bones, and she's got this little baby and kind of an African snuggly. And my wife points at her and kind of nudges me, and we think the exact same way. And so we motion her to come over, and so we tell the guards to let her through, and she comes in, and in kind of broken English, we ask her, like, do you need something? And she says, yes, she wants a bag of corn flour to make ugali, which is kind of the bread that they eat there. And she wants a box of wooden matches. Remember this, Rachel? She wants oh, jeez. What happened? Sorry. She wants a box of wooden matches. That's what she wants. So we grab those things and we put it in the cart, and then we point over to the meat counter, and she looks confused, and we take her over there, and behind glass, all these meats, and we say to her, what do you want? And her eyes get big, and she looks shocked. And she's tentative, and she's like points to some chicken, and so we get some chicken and wrap it up, and then we point to the beef. Do you want beef? And she says yes, and then we took her over to the produce aisle, and we did the same thing, and then we took her to the dry goods, and we got some beans and rice and pasta, and then my kids are getting in this, and she's got a little baby, so my kids are like, well, she probably can't afford diapers, so let's go get them diapers, and they bring back, they were running back with diaper cream and toothbrushes and toothpaste and shampoos, and my kids are just like anything they see, they're just grabbing it, throwing it in. And we go, and we bought it for this lady, and then she, she was quite frail. We think she was probably sick. She's probably HIV positive, probably. That we went and got a taxi, and we took her back to her place and brought her for groceries. And here's the deal. In a country where everything screams how wealthy I am, I've never felt richer than I did in that moment. I've never spent $120 that made me feel more alive, more free, more happy than that $120. It's because here's the deal. Happiness, freedom, security, it doesn't follow riches. You know what it follows? It follows generosity. When generosity drives the train, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can feel rich. You can know what Jesus says in verse 21, what it's like to be rich before God. You can have that experience. You want to feel rich? You want to know the pleasure of being able to enjoy what you have? Then give some of it away. Generosity comes first. Andy Stanley has a really simple little 6 words which has stuck with me. I'm going to borrow it and use it. He says most of us look at our money like this. We live, so we spend our money on whatever it takes us to live. First priority number 1. Priority number 2 is we save, which we may or we may not do depending on how well we're living, what standard of living we're trying to live up to. And the third thing we do is that we give. After we've taken care of all this, if there's anything left, then we'll consider giving. But that way of thinking says, mine, others. And Jesus says, that's entirely wrong. You'll never be happy. You'll never feel rich if you live that way. You need to flip that around. You need to give first. Then you need to save, and then you need to live. That's what you want to do if you actually want to feel alive with your money, if you want to feel free, if you want to feel happy. Remember, Jesus says, and Jesus says some incredible things about money, but he says, remember, you cannot serve 2 masters. And he's not talking about God and Satan. He says, you cannot serve God and money. One of those 2 will take mastery over your life. One of those 2 will make you a servant of it. But you can't serve them both at the same time. And money with its alluring lie of just a little bit more to feel secure, just a little bit more to feel happy, just a little bit more to fulfill my appetite, will leave you a slave that will leave you empty. And Jesus said, if you want to serve God, if you want to be alive, you want to be rich towards God, then you have money serve you. You possess your money doesn't possess you. And the best way that we grow in that is we start by being generous. Now here's the deal. Generosity isn't an event. I'm not generous because of one time I went and spent $120 on a lady. That doesn't make me generous. You see something on TV of a natural disaster, an earthquake somewhere in Haiti, and you feel guilty, or you feel moved, and you say, you phone up and put $250 on my Visa, which is a good thing to do, but that doesn't make you generous. Generosity isn't an event. Generosity is a lifestyle. It is a rhythm by which we continually use our money. Now, how it works in our family is, I'm kind of lucky, is that I get my paycheck gets automatically debited twice a month. And we've also signed up for automatic debiting of our tithe. So our tithe comes out twice a month. And it comes out the exact same day that I get paid. So before I spend money on anything else, the first chunk of my money goes to my church, goes to our church. It makes it really easy. I would encourage you, if you want to find freedom and happiness in your money, you need to have a regular rhythm by which you give. And one of the kingdom ways is that we pool our money together so that we can do more, we can leverage more with our money for God's kingdom. That's one way. So I encourage you to think through a percentage. If you haven't done it, grab a percentage. It doesn't have to be 10. Probably start at least 5, because anything lower than 5, you're not even going to feel it, you're not even going to notice it. Start at 5. But then I would also encourage you to look for those things that are going on around the world that maybe grab your heart. Maybe something that moves you or something that inspires you. Maybe it's an orphanage somewhere. Maybe it's an organization that helps kids go to school. Maybe it's bringing fresh water somewhere. And then support them, not just one-off, but regularly support them. Phone them up and say, where you can make a one-time donation or you can make it monthly. Click the monthly thing. And then third is to be open to God's Spirit. When there are needs around and He puts it on your heart that here is the opportunity to be generous. When we say yes to those things, When we step into that, when we have shown God our faithfulness in the regular rhythm of giving, God will bring incredible opportunities that will fill you with so much life and so much joy when you say yes to God. You will be able to demonstrate what Fromm says, the potency of your wealth, the potency of your character. And the reason why we know that's true, because that's what God does. I promise you, you can get the strongest telescope and you can scan the heavens for as long as God gives you a heartbeat, and you will not find some place on the backside of Saturn where God is storing up all of His goodies for later. That isn't going to happen. Because God doesn't hold. He never has. The most popular verse in our Bible says that God so loved the world that He what? That He gave. And you know what else Scripture says? Is that God determined to give and be generous even before He made the world. He started with generosity. And He calls us to do the same. Because He says, that's where my kingdom is. That's where you'll find life. That's where you'll find happiness. That's where you will find freedom. So may God move us to use the labors of our hand to be a generous people that reflect His own generosity to us. Let's pray. Lord, we just confess that there are so many shiny things in our life that clamor for our attention. There are endless opportunities to pursue our desires with our resources, with our stuff, with our money. They never end. They never will end. There's also all kinds of fears and stresses and that would drive us to think that we need to hoard and pull stuff in close and protect it. God, we know that people who do that never find themselves free from anxiety. And that's why Jesus, in the very next verse after the story, He says, why are you anxious? Don't worry about your life, because your Heavenly Father will care for you. There's something about mimicking your generosity that swells our hearts with faith, opens our eyes to how good you are, that you will care for us, and brings us to a place of peace, brings us to a place of happiness, brings us to a place of freedom that consuming and hoarding doesn't and never will. God, would you help us believe that? God, Jesus tells us that it's so easy for our money to possess us. And so we need your grace in this. And I would ask, God, that if there are people here who have written off being generous because they keep seeing everything that they need to do with life first, I ask that they would, in an act of faith, they would say, I'm going to be generous first. They would start. They would find a place or an organization or a mission or a cause or a church that they would give to. And with all the freedom that Jesus promises comes with that, with being rich toward God, may they grow in that, and may it be our experience. In Jesus' name, amen.